Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Groover. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Welcome to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Mefford.
And I am Kathy Groover, and we are excited to do just another little quick episode for you today, just a little mini bite of information on resilience and building resilience. And this is exciting for me. I do a lot of work in the stress realm, and we can't stop that external stress. Typically, we absolutely want to stop the things that we can, limit the amount of stress that's coming into ourselves, but we also want to build that resilience. We're born with a certain amount of stress resilience, and then we can change that over time. So we're going to talk about a couple different ways how to do that today.
Yeah, because this is something, again, it's very practical as well, right? Because, and again, this is one of those skills. We have ups and we have downs. That's just part of life, right? And there's sometimes when you get hit with several big life things at the same time. Other times it's just a little blip here and there. And so, if you imagine yourself as kind of your emotional spectrum kind of going up and going down and going up and going down, that's normal. But resiliency helps you to kind of flatten that out a little bit and recover quicker when you end up down in the toilet, if you will, right? So what are some of the ways, I guess, that we can become more resilient? Because I think this is another practice that we have to go through, right? It's not like we can, close our eyes and tap our ruby red slippers, shoes together, and all of a sudden we're now resilient. There's actually some things we need to do.
Yeah, and there's a couple of tools that I absolutely love. I do a lot of teaching of meditation and mindfulness, and when we are in that place of stillness, when we're in that pause that comes with breath work or meditation, when we just dismiss those thoughts without judgment and we get to stay in this neutral place, that to me is one of the best ways to build resilience. Because if we go about this stuff with non-judgment, with curiosity, with a child's mind, and we be patient and kind with ourselves, it kind of puts us in this neutral place. And from that neutral self, you can put on whatever you want. You can choose to respond at that point rather than react. And I just did this really great program on PQ, which is emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, that sort of thing. And he talks about coming from this sage self, this wise self, this, neutral place. And when you come from that sage self, you're not being hit with those saboteurs. You're not being hit with all that stress. You have that strength and that calm and that curiosity to respond to what's happening rather than being in that saboteur of maybe the controller or the judge and not reacting to things that are happening around you. It's I don't remember what movie it was, but the main character sort of stands in the center and they fast forward everything. And there's just all this stuff going around him and he's just still in the middle of that. That's kind of the image, is just coming from that place of stillness and curiosity and patience. Because, I'm so good at that. I'm working on it. And then you choose to respond to those things rather than react. That's one of my favorite tools.
Well, and I think, again, that's one of those things. You've heard us talking about some of these skills before for other different reasons, right? But, the more that you can practice being able to control your breathing and control your thinking, when you get in that point, right? And I like to talk about it kind of based on brain waves, right? Because, again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to slow down our brain waves, because when we're feeling anxious and fearful, we're usually in a high beta frequency, right? Which is like, if you think about lowest, and when I go up high, you're obviously freaking out, right? And a lot of those times of stress or anxiety, you are especially like, what the hell are you doing, Jason? It's a good auditory thing to get people to understand it. But it's the fact, because usually when we're in these times, we're more anxious, we're more fearful, and slowing down your brain waves by doing things like breathing and meditating and having that clearness of thought and being able to get into that stillness and bring yourself back to a neutral the better you are at being able to do that, the quicker you can get through some of these challenges that you may have in your life instead of sticking out there in freak out mode.
Right. Well, because what that does is that keeps us freaking out. Once we get into that cycle of stress, then our brain is on high alert and everything looks stressful. You know, you're walking through the backyard and you go, oh, a snake. Oh, it's a hose. Oh, a snake. You know, and you start to get into that, like, just firing. You start to see things more negatively. You start to get a little more knee-jerk reaction-y. You know, that's what the brain does. It becomes on high alert. So when we're constantly in that fight or flight, it's looking more diligently for danger, and it starts to see danger everywhere. So to the extent that we can calm that down with breathing, meditation, mindfulness, you know, whatever works for you, that's why I love those techniques. The other thing that I really like, and we've talked so much about ego states, and it's truly even more so becoming one of my favorite things. If you come from that place of self, and self is compassionate, caring, curious, courageous, if you sit in that neutral space, and I kind of picture it like paper dolls, you know, you probably didn't play with, I think they had boy paper dolls too, but you know, you get this like cardboard doll who's just in this like little frock kind of thing, and she stands there, and then it comes with all these other outfits that you can put on, and you can make them, you know, like a princess, and you can make them like a Wonder Woman, and you can make them, you know, like all these things. When we can come from that place of self, and again, it's that neutral place, then we choose which aspect of our personality that we want to put on that. And it's harder to do when you get stuck in an ego state that's evaded or negative or scared or paranoid or stressed. It's harder to choose a healthy state when you're already so far gone on that other negative state. If you can stay in self, which is neutral, you can put on whatever ego state you need to handle the stuff that's going on around you. And that builds resilience. You have a resilient ego state. You just have to step into it.
Well, and the more that we can actually practice that when you're not in these seriously stressful times, it makes it easier for you when you do get into those stressful times, right? So think about it like doing a few push-ups every day, right? And there's some time when you're going to have to, you know, use your arm muscles to push yourself out of something. Doing those push-ups every single day makes it way easier when that big weight is pushing down on you, right? And I think, you know, another thing that you talked about too, you know, with resilience, because like you said, it's kind of the ups and downs, right? And some of the ups and some of the downs aren't going to be very dramatic, right? But sometimes we end up dropping way down. And so again, at that point, you know, I usually teach people kind of about like this emotional scale, right? Well, if you're feeling anger, just try to move up a couple of rungs. It's still technically, you know, what would be considered a negative emotion, but it's still better than where you were at. And so just try to climb up that ladder a little bit. And the interesting thing on that kind of model, usually boredom is like the middle point, which is kind of this neutral thing again, right? And so it's like just do what you can to move yourself up a little bit. Because if you're trying to pull yourself up the ladder, you're making progress. If you just wallow at the bottom, then you're just going to get stuck there.
Yeah. And no, I love the emotional tone scale. That is one of my favorite. I used to play with that all the time because you can also bring other people up tone. You can match them and help bring them up that ladder. It's a beautiful technique. I had something I was going to say, and it
flittered away.
It floated away. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Well, it'll come back. But no, I think, you know, and again, as we talked about at the beginning, right, that practicing and learning how to be resilient is a really important life skill. Couple we've talked about, you know, get back to a place of stillness. You know, again, whether that's through breathing, meditation, some kind of mindful practice, so that you try to get back to this neutral point. At least you're kind of moving back up the scale. And then also about the ego states, right?
That's
and again,
that's what
you're going to go further on the ego states. All right, go.
I mean, because it's. I've had people say, okay, well, that's great. You know how to do this. You're an actor. That's not really what it is, though. If you look at Meryl Streep, she's brilliant. I hear a lot that I look like her. she's basically just switching ego states. That's how she's getting into these characters. She's tapping into those parts of herself. So yeah, it's easy for me to switch those because I do have an idea of character, and I'm also really familiar with my ego states. The more familiar you are with who you are, the easier it's going to be to move into that character, if you will, that you want to use to present that. So this is where I love, when I teach ego states, like map your ego states. Who are these parts of yourself and what qualities do they have? Just like you're casting a play. I have my Capricorn, who's very linear, who I have to put on task to get stuff done. And I have my playful child, and I have, if you know who you are, if you know what your team looks like, you're not going to call the UPS store to fix your computer. You're not going to go to your oil change guy for a colonoscopy. You're not going to call so similar, I mean, frankly, but you're not, we have people that are specialized in things. So if you know who inside yourself, what aspect of you specializes in handling that situation, and then figure out how to activate that in yourself. To me, I know you're a speaker too, it's sort of driving me crazy having to be on Zoom, because sitting and trying to do a talk it's not the way I do it. I want to be active. I want to be in my high heels, because as soon as I put those shoes on, I'm in speaker mode. That triggers that aspect of myself. And so I've had to find a way to put on Kathy's speaker in yoga pants, no shoes, and a nice coat, a nice suit jacket. So it's like, what gets you into that place? Is it music? Is it watching somebody else do that thing? Yep. Practice it, because the more familiar you are stepping into that personality, the better you're going to be at it, and the quicker you'll be able to switch out of those negative states.
Well, and if you're one of those people, like the Kathy just mentioned, that says, "Oh, well, Kathy, it's easy for you because you're an actor, right?" The only difference is the practice, right? You've been doing the push-ups for longer, so yes, it's going to be a little easier for you because you've practiced it more, right? And so the only way that you're going to improve is to practice it. Right. And you're not going to get it right the first time. You're not going to be perfect. But the more consistent you are at actually doing it and actually practicing it, the easier it will come. Right. Again, first time you do 20 push-ups, it's like, right. But if you've been doing, 20 push-ups a day for a year, 20 push-ups isn't that hard at that point, once you've been consistent in actually practicing and exercising it. And again, that's why that word practice comes into so much of what we talk about. Again, whether it's mindful practice, breathing practice, whatever, because we're actually practicing what it is. Yeah.
And what's really cool is I can't do push-ups. It hurts my shoulder, it hurts my elbow, it hurts my wrist. It's not my thing. And then I had somebody really hone the technique for me, show me a different way to do them, rather than doing it out like this, do it in like that. Didn't hurt my elbow as much, felt a little better on my wrist. So it's like, when you really know the technique, practice it correctly. I mean, how often have we been lifting weights or doing something where it's like, I got it, and then you realize your plank is like, your butt's so far, of course you can do it, you're not doing it right, or you're not doing it as good as it could be, or not being as efficient with it. And that's one of the things with the ego states, is you can't switch into an ego state if you don't know what it is. If you don't know what you're shooting for, if you don't know who is on your team, if you show up into the office and you don't know who the office clerk is versus the legal assistant versus the mail guy, you don't know who to give that job to. So I think it goes back to that know thyself thing, and really reflect. And again, knowledge is power. And the better we know ourselves, the better we're going to be at communication, leadership, relationships, interacting with other people. So I think it just comes from that place of knowledge, of really sitting with self and saying, who am I? What can I handle? What can I not handle? And also, if it's something as far as resilience goes, you don't have to handle everything. Mm-hmm. You can always ask for help. You can always reach out to somebody else and say, look, I really can't handle this. That used to happen with my ex at funerals. He's an incredibly emotional man, but he was the one, he's an actor too, that he could shut out the emotion. He could stand up in front of a room full of people that were devastated because their child died, and he could read everybody's message in front of everybody. I can't do that. I fall apart. It ends up being, he was the one that could do that. So people came to him and said, look, I can't handle this. Can you do this for me? It is totally okay to do that too. If you can't muster the resilience that it takes, it's totally okay to ask for help.
Yep. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Good stuff. Woohoo.
Woo!
Do you have any like little tips that we didn't cover? I mean, we got a lot in there.
No, I think we did it. And again, it's, that's kind of where I would go. My first kind of go to is that trying to get back to a place of stillness that we talked about, trying to, control your breathing, control your brain waves a little bit. And think about it from the emotional scale, like we talked about. To me, that's just an easy way for people to kind of understand. It's like, oh, well, instead of being angry, can I be whatever, right? What would I be thinking?
Yeah.
What would I need to think to move from being angry to something else, right? And just start practicing, just play with it. And every time that you get triggered, when you get triggered in the little things, and you start to take a dip down, that's the perfect time to practice, because it's not so hard. It's not like the elephant's on your back already, right? And so practice a little bit, so that then again, when the elephant is on your back, you've already been preparing and you're much stronger for being able to help lift it off.
Yeah. And thanks for that reminder. I think we try to tackle the big stuff first. I want to start running. I'm going to do a marathon this weekend. Ooh.
Well, because a lot of times we don't realize or recognize it until the shit's really hit the fan and we're like in a deep, dark depression. And to be resilient, you got to learn how to practice and work on it before you get to that point, because it's really, really hard
I
at
totally
that point.
agree. That's a beautiful reminder to start out small, to practice with the little things first. So yeah, oh, I love it. I love this conversation. All right. I am Kathy Groover. I can be reached at kathygroover.com.
And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So go out, practice, and start being more resilient. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. See ya.